the millions, and we will be. Because it starts right here.
Guilty!
The truth never dies! The truth never dies! Come on!
Welcome to another episode of Naptown People's Radio, a weekly podcast recorded at the Indianapolis Liberation Center. I'm one of your co-hosts, Derek Ford, here this week with my comrade and the show's producer, Dakota Fronterhouse. We're here to guide you through the pressing issues facing Indianapolis from the perspective of the people, not our oppressors. And as organizers involved in these issues, we're not just talking about the news, we're making it happen. So Dakota, what's on tap for today?
Thanks, Derek. For this week's episode, we're talking about the new documentary, Soul in Exile, Shaka Shakur, produced by the Shaka Shakur Freedom Campaign, a fellow member organization here at the Indianapolis Liberation Center. The documentary hasn't yet been released, but for those of you in or around Naptown, you have the chance for an exclusive premiere on Tuesday, September 23rd from 6 to 9 p.m. at the Liberation Center. We'll screen the documentary, which runs about 42-ish minutes, and then we'll have a panel discussion featuring Achilles Shakur, the wife of Shaka A. Shakur, and longtime organizer for political prisoners and the Black struggle. We'll have Nairobi X, founder of Hear Her Voice, and we'll have Maurice Robinson of the new Afrikan Freedom Campaign, the Shaka Shakur Freedom Campaign, and the Slang Movement, which stands for Struggling, Living, and Never Giving Up. Additionally, at the event, we'll hear from the film's directors, including Derek, and others involved. This is not only an opportunity to get a sneak peek at the documentary before its worldwide release, it's also a call out for anyone interested in joining the Indiana chapter of the Shaka Shakur Freedom Campaign. So on this episode, we have a segment of Dispatches from Behind the Wire with Shaka Shakur, where Derek and Shaka discuss some of the background to the film that focuses on the new Afrikan Independence Movement. After, we'll get into a bit more detail about the documentary and, as always, let you know about some opportunities to plug into the struggle this week in Naptown. After a short break, we will be right back with our comrade behind the enemy lines, Shaka Shakur.
Hi, this is Rissa, an organizer and volunteer with the Indianapolis Liberation Center. As a lead organizer with Hope Packages, we are doing the work necessary to struggle with the people, bringing folks together from both working and oppressed communities to assemble direct aid and distribute these packages wherever they are. In addition to serving our communities directly, we seek to enrich our communities with the necessary political education to fight against systems that continue to harm working people. Hope Packages, Struggle, Unity, Solidarity, is a direct political aid program providing necessary resources to people who are struggling in communities across our city. Organized around a 10-point program, Hope Packages is about more than caring. It's about struggling together, uniting, and building the solidarity needed to transform Indianapolis. The idea for Hope Packages was born during the successful struggle to defeat Anti-Homeless Ordinance Proposition 291. Initially founded as a collaboration between Indy 10, Black Lives Matter, and PSL Indianapolis in January 2021, it has been an independent organization sponsored by Indianapolis Liberation Center since October 2023. This is the same idea the Black Panther Party had with their free breakfast programs and their over 200 programs they called Survival Pending Revolution. Their programs were always aimed at building alliances, creating unity, and raising consciousness. Similarly, we're serving and struggling for our people, and we are entirely funded by donations from our volunteers and the community. So to keep growing and growing, we ask anyone who is interested to get involved. You can find out how to donate, sustain, and volunteer at indyhopepackages.org. We're honored to be struggling alongside our member organizations at the Indianapolis Liberation Center, and we hope to see you at an assembly soon.
And we're back, and we are honored to be joined by our dear comrade, someone who does more for the center and the people of our city, state, and world than you could really imagine, because he's doing it from behind enemy lines in Virginia. He's also someone who, after decades as a political prisoner, hasn't lost hope and keeps training new generations of fighters. So, Shaka, we've been working on this new documentary for a while now, and we're all excited for its release. And this week, we wanted to focus on the tradition that you're carrying on in theory and practice, the new Afrikan Independence Movement. So, of course, you can speak about whatever, but I did want at the beginning of this to have you speak a bit about the origins of that movement and the new Afrikans as a people more generally.
terms of the New African Independence Movement, rather, every people has a rhythm of its own. The rhythm may be disrupted, but it never stops. You know what I'm saying? Every people has its own beat. You know what I'm saying? Culturally, language, social interaction, so forth and so on. New African people are no different. Even though Africa was raided and we was captured, our ancestors was captured, and we fought back, we resisted, just like all other people. We had our traitors and those that collaborated, so forth and so on. But that within itself was the origin of in the beginning, the genesis of the creation of the New African nation. Okay? Because through that process, you had many from different nations, different tribes, different languages, different religions, or what have you, right? If you remember, it was a scene in Roots when they was on that boat down in the belly of the boat, and they was all chained and shackled together in the belly of the boat, and they started hollering out their tribal identities. You know what I'm saying? In what languages they spoke, and they started organizing. And they were like, I speak this, I speak that. I'm from the tribal, boo boo boo. I'm from an Ibu, I'm Ashanti, I'm this. And that was them organizing right there. You know what I'm saying? That was that genesis, that many forming into one. You know what I'm saying? Taking shape, And it is through that whole process that continued on as we entered into the Western Hemisphere, onto the islands and onto the slave plantations and whatnot. You had a whole new identity forming and taking shape through that common oppression. You know what I'm saying? Giving rise to a religion, giving rise to a way of speaking, giving rise to language, ultimately giving rise to blues and jazz and gospel and spirituals and so forth. You understand? The way we dance, the way we move, the way we interact, the way we make love and everything else. You know what I'm saying? That was unique to our people. That was shaped and formed by the social conditions and the social reality and our response to that social condition and the social reality that we was dealing with within the Western Hemisphere. Okay? So although we're separate from the continent of Africa, we're no less African than anybody that's in Nigeria, that formulated into Nigeria, Ghana, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, etc. We just, as a people and as a nation, form over here in America. You know what I'm saying? That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is, contrary to the statement by Kanye West about slavery being a choice, and giving the impression that there was no resistance, we've always resisted. You understand? We've always organized. We've always fought for independence and separation and land. You know what I'm saying? Whether it was in the form of the Maroons, moving, fighting and retreating into the mountains and the hills, whether it was in the form of Nat Turner, with his military strikes and so forth, and so forth. So with that being said, that resistance has never stopped. You know what I'm saying? That desire to be free and self-governing and independent has never stopped. It may have been disrupted, it may have been attacked, but it has never stopped. It has been a continuity and a continuing. You know what I'm saying? It has taken on different forms of expression, but it has never stopped.
Yeah, for sure. And, wherever there's oppression, there's resistance. And I don't want to interrupt the flow, because we're still talking about the formation of the new African people. But, a people is defined by a common language, culture, history, traditions, economy, and also territory, right? So I think that's one key element I think a lot of people might misunderstand or just don't understand or just don't know about. It's why, religious groups don't constitute a nation. So I was wondering, as you continue telling us this story, if you could also, speak about the issue, the primary issue, right? The fundamental issue of land and why, free the land is the rallying cry, one primary rallying cry for the new African Independence Movement.
Moving on, when you move into, say, the period of the Civil War, of 1861 or 1865, in our decision and tactical decision and choice to join the war and whatnot on our behalf to try to liberate ourselves and so forth on so-called behalf for the Union. That's just another phase. You know what I'm saying? Another phase, another aspect of an attempt to become free and self-governing and independent and what have you, and manipulating the reality and the terrain and boost that was on the ground, the situation on the ground at the time. And with that being said, you've had different theories and strategies on how to achieve that, but in a larger context of colonization, what the United States did after the Civil War, even though we went through a period of Reconstruction and all of that, and they made us paper citizens, imposed citizenship upon us, which is illegal, which is against international law. You don't impose a constitution on a people. You don't amend a people into a constitution. You understand? The people themselves help formulate and create their own constitution. They did not do that in the United States. They did not do that after slavery. And in fact, the signers of the Constitution after the American independence, after they so-called American Revolution and whatnot, but many were slaveholders. And while you talked about freedom and democracy and whatnot, you was raping African women. You had African women as concubines, you know what I'm saying? You had African people as slaves. You had as property. While you talking about liberty and you talking about the rights of all people and equal justice for all and all of that other stuff, you know what I'm saying? That sounds good, but you ain't standing on. And so what they did after the Civil War, what you did was you made slavery legal in the sense that you privatized it. You state-owned. You took it from, with the 13th Amendment, when you state that there should need to be slavery that's duly convicted of a crime, slavery or indentured servitude that's duly convicted of a crime. You took it from the individual slave master and you moved it over to the state. You understand? Where now the state's the slave master. And what you did behind that, you created all kind of what they call the black codes, and you created the Jim Crow and so forth, where you can continue to now, instead of just having us on plantation, you can incarcerate us and make them the new plantations. You know what I'm saying? And you can trick us now where you spit on the sidewalk, that's a $500 fine that I have no way in hell of paying. So now I'm sentenced to 5 years hard labor on some plantation when you leasing me out. It's the same thing. You know what I'm saying? It's smoke and mirrors. It don't matter. They talk about whether Democrats and Republicans and whatnot, Dixiecrats, they all part of the same gang. You know what I'm saying? They support the status quo. And they support corporate America. They support the elite of America. They support the American institutions. You know what I'm saying? And they, however much rhetoric in terms of liberalism and democracy and all that, again, it sounds good on paper. It looks good on paper. On paper, the U.S. Constitution looks beautiful. It sounds beautiful. You understand? But it's smoke and mirrors. You're a paper tiger. So again, just in terms of the process and our response to that, and then the war that you declared upon us after the Civil War, when you got the Klan and you got the citizen councils, the white citizen councils and so forth, and you terrorizing us out of the South. You terrorizing us out of our national territory. You terrorizing us out of the area where we blood, sweat, tear, and fought for. You know what I'm saying? Who cultivated the South? Who made Mississippi?
Yeah, for sure. And there's obviously a long history there. We recently did a study of the Black Belt thesis. And, you and I have spoken about this before, but the Black Belt thesis was something developed by Black communists in the United States. Now, many of them were members of the African Black Brotherhood, which was an underground, very small underground organization, all of whom eventually became members and leading members of the Communist Party of the United States. And in consultation with their comrades in the Soviet Union and the international communist movement more generally, it was officially adopted at the 6th Congress of the Communist International in 1928. And according to Harry Haywood, one of the main theoreticians, it was at the behest of Stalin, actually, who put this on the agenda because he grew up in an oppressed nation, Georgia, right? He didn't have the right to speak Georgian. His people didn't have a right to their nationality. They had the great Russian nationality imposed on them. And so this was really the first time, obviously the the desire, as you said, for independence, self-determination, etc., goes back way before this. But, this was the first time there was a generalized theory and directive to implement and act on that theory that Black people constituted an oppressed nation within the U.S., and therefore, communists and progressives worldwide, including here in the U.S., had a duty to fight for the national liberation of those people and of that territory, right, for their independence, self-determination, autonomy, and most importantly, right, the right to separation. And although the boundaries of that territory have shifted, and as you say in your upcoming book, all that's to be determined in the future as the struggle plays out, right? But the general idea still holds that we must fight for the new African people's right to their national territory. Is that correct?
We have a legitimate claim to that area, what they call the Black Belt South. You understand? And by law, international law, after people, you do not have the right to force a citizenship on a colonized people. We are a colony of the United States, always have been. And now it has elevated to the stage of neo-colonialism. Neo only meant it new. It's a higher stage of capitalism, a higher stage of colonialism. You understand? And after slavery, we should have been given the right to what they call a plebiscite vote, which is a people's vote, to decide whether or not we wanted to become American citizens or assimilate into the American system, or whether or not we wanted to go back to Africa, or whether or not we wanted some land of our own to be independent. We were not given that. Instead, you imposed the 13th Amendment upon us and declared us as Americans, which we all know is false. You understand? Because if we was Americans and we was considered Americans and by birth we was American, we would not have to go through all the stuff that we had to go through. We would not need the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, affirmative actions, and all these other acts. You understand? They act like don't mean nothing, or that they got to renew every 30, 40, 50 years. You understand? First of all, why do you need that law or any of those laws if you're in America, if it's legit? You understand? If you're equal to everyone else. Two, if you're correcting a wrong and an injustice, why do you have to renew it? So what happens when you get a Project 2025 in there, you understand, or Trump in there or what have you, or Congress that say, hey, we don't want to renew that. The times has changed. Like they said, there's no longer need for ethnic quotas in college and academic. There's no longer a need for affirmative action. We've come so far now; those things are no longer relevant. So it's no longer needed for a Voters' Rights Act and so forth. You go to the Civil Rights Act. Y'all good. Y'all free. We got a black president. Y'all good. You know what I'm saying? Then what you gonna do? And these is basic rights and just principles, but also something that people take for granted and that you don't think about.
And, that leads to the important distinction between racism and national oppression, and the fight against racism and or the fight against national oppression and national chauvinism. Because it's not a matter of semantics, right? Isn't it political whether one is, defined by their race or their nation?
Where does that leave you as a person of color or as a colonized nation? A lot of people don't understand, like you hear people, we always talk about race. Race is a superficial concept. Race is a social construction. You understand? It's not scientific. It takes 46 chromosomes to create a human being, 23 from the male, 23 from the female. Anything higher or less, you're going to have something other than a human, right? So if you just look at human beings, irregardless of color or anything else, right, that belong to the human family and humanity, you understand, which is what we all should be pushing for, the human race. Everything else that comes with that, for the most part, is a social construct. However, within that human family, you do have ethnicities or what have you, peoples that have unique historical development, that has unique experiences. You understand? And that is what we identify with in terms of our nationality, etc. We have gone through a process as a people that have given rise to a nation. Understand? Not a race, but a nation. And within that context, a nation has the right to land, A nation have a right to self-determination. A nation has a right to create its own economical and political institutions to meet the needs of its people. You understand? You have a right to create a military or any other kind of science to defend those institutions in the interest of those people. It doesn't mean that you anti anyone else. It means that you as a human being has a right to choose and decide for yourself, collectively and amongst yourselves, what it is that you want to do as a people. Okay? That is something that was denied to us. And that is the essence, the very essence, for the most part, of the new African independence and national liberation movement and our struggle. That we fighting for that, we have a right to that, you understand? And we have a right to engage in the necessary struggles by any means necessary to achieve that. You understand? And historically, the United States government have waged war on our people and people of color and colonized people to prevent us from exercising those rights, even when they have been peacefully. You know what I'm saying? Even we have peacefully demonstrated and organized for redress, you understand, or attempt to achieve these goals, they have infiltrated, they have assassinated, they have manipulated, you understand, they have committed genocide, and they have murdered our leaders and our people to prevent what's supposed to be a human right. You know, so when people ask us, what is the new African Independence Movement? What does that mean? That is the origin, for the most part, of the new African Independence Movement and the national liberation struggle. In 1968, we had over 500 new African nationalists, revolutionaries, activists, socialists, and so forth come together and hold a conference in Detroit, Michigan, at the New Bethel Church. Queen Mother Moore, who was the matriarch of the movement, you know, where we developed and decided on a Declaration of Independence for the New African Independence Movement, which was signed by many members of this group, of this organization, and these members that attended this conference. We developed a New African Creed, which guides the principles of how we interact and so forth in our vision. And these is what we stand on, and we declared ourselves a free and independent nation and committed to the struggle to make that materialize in reality. And that is what we do today, and that is part of that struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. And, thank you for that. For those, of course, who are interested in learning more about this movement, the importance and centrality of it today, historically, most importantly, today and for the future, you can go to shakashakur.org to learn more about that. And, of course, come out to the Liberation Center for the exclusive preview of the new documentary. Thank you again, Shaka, for joining us. It's a big sacrifice on your part, and we always appreciate you taking the time to, not only be on this show, but, be such a central figure at the Indianapolis Liberation Center. So again, thank you. And after a short break, we'll be right back.
Is that we responded. Where there is repression, there will be resistance.
And we're back on Naptown People's Radio. So before we wrap up, I want to call your attention to a few things happening this week. So first, as our last episode, which featured FTFKD showed, we're a part of the growing movement led by, in many ways, Citizens Action Coalition to stop Google's data center from taking over part of our city and damaging all of it. So go to their website, which will be in the show notes, sign their petition, and send an email to your counselor voicing your opposition. And be on the lookout for upcoming actions about that. Second, as always, this Saturday, September 20th, from 9:30 a.m. to 11 a.m., join Circle City Sangha for their weekly mindfulness meetups at the Liberation Center. Later that day, at 1 p.m. at the center, is the monthly Hope Packages Assembly meeting. Because the system uses hunger as a tool of oppression, this month they highlight point 5 of their 10-point program, Ending Food Apartheid. guaranteeing the equal distribution of high-quality and affordable grocery stores in all neighborhoods. So join Hope Packages as they fight food apartheid in its many forms here in Indiana and across the globe, including the reduction of food stamps to millions of households, to the seizing of aid and food from people in Palestine, and discuss what actions we can take here in our city to guarantee access to food for all people. Also, we encourage you to go over to the Indianapolis Arts Center for 2 exhibitions. One is On the Count by Gina Lee Robbins, and another is Prison Reimagined. They're on display until October 5th, and as part of that exhibition, this Saturday between 1 and 3 p.m., there will be a discussion on art and transformative justice featuring panelists from here and across the country, including the co-founder and executive director of Death Penalty Action, the curator and artistic director of Prison Reimagined, Presidential Portrait, Gina Lee Robbins, featured artist of On the Count, and others. And as always, events pop up, so be sure to keep an eye on IndiaLiberationCenter.org in the meantime. And that's it for this episode of Naptown People's Radio. If you found today's discussion useful, pass it on, leave a comment, and listen for our next episode to drop. Support us at support.pslindianapolis.org and by shopping at the Liberation Center store, which you can find at IndiaLiberationCenter.org. If you have a suggestion for the show, please email us and our producer, Dakota, at producer@naptownpeoplesradio.com. The road ahead is long, but we walk it together. Study with your comrades, build with your community, and always remember, theory without action is paralysis, but action without theory is chaos. Once again, I'm your host, Derek Ford. Stay dangerous, stay disciplined, and stay in the struggle.
We trying to create a movement. We got a chance to do something in Indiana that brothers like myself been talking about for the last 40 years. When I first became political and we was organized behind the walls in the 80s and 90s, some of the stuff that we doing now with the different programs and the different institutions that we have and things like the Indy Center is things that we used to talk about and dream about doing. And now we doing them. See what I'm saying? We doing it. And we got to keep that momentum going, and it's also generation. So as the next generation come up, you know what I'm saying, it's on y'all to take it to the next level and take it to the next stage. Salute, Shaka